Greetings everyone, I am the Mad Scientist, aka Dr. J. For many of us who play Ranked, there is often a champion that we can point to as the one that either helped make or did make the first major difference in our Ranked career. For me, that champion was Maokai. When I was first doing the rank ladder, way back when the dinosaurs roamed the earth in Season 2, I was a lowly bronzy who was still figuring out what he was doing and still believed in Elo hell. I had heard about Jungle Maokai from the competitive scene, found out that he was on the free week, and tried out a couple of games in normals with him. I don't remember much about those 2 games, but I do remember having a lot of fun with him and picking him up almost immediately afterward. A couple new rune pages and a few days later, I had broken out of the elo that I had been sitting in for months. I didn't get into gold that season, not that I played too much Janna to enjoy that skin anyway, but I did reach the point I was shooting for, and I could walk away from the rank ladder satisfied with my progress. And now, with the patch 4.11 buffs to support junglers, I am glad to say that my troubles with jungling this season are over. My favorite and most consistent jungler is back, and it's time to show you why I love to play him and what the big deal is. Screw Lee Sin and all the BS he's kicked into the jungle. This is my Maokai guide. Maokai is a tanky jungler, who is most infamous for his powerful ganks and his ability to tank all the damage bravely to the face. In order to be an effective tank in a PvP game, it's important for your toolkit to have something in it that warrants the enemy's attention. In the case of Maokai, he is really good at latching onto a single enemy champion and making their lives miserable, with enough crowd control, innate damage, and damage mitigation to make anyone want to run away from the tree. His toolkit can be used both to initiate teamfights, getting into the enemy's backline and creating openings for assassins to come in, and be used defensively to peel off enemies trying to do the same to his own damage dealers. He also packs a lot of utility in his toolkit, both through granting vision and mitigating damage to allies around him. While there are plenty of good things about his toolkit, he isn't a perfect champion. The first major issue is his ability to actually initiate. The range on his only gap closer is lower than the majority of ranged auto attacks, making it difficult at times just to get up to the enemy if you can't land a slow. To mitigate this, you'll want to ensure that you maintain good vision over the bushes to take advantage of the element of surprise, as once that you've gotten next to an enemy, it's going to be hard to get rid of you. Another thing he struggles with is that he is very much a support jungler. Unlike most junglers that are currently popular, he cannot kill most targets on his own. He can leave a good dent in them, but not necessarily kill them. In order to use him effectively, you will have to ensure that your damage dealers both remain alive and are able to follow in your wake. If you are able to look past those weaknesses, what you will find is a strong tank who is out to crush those reckless mages that cross his path. Pre-level 6, our favorite tree is one of, if not the most powerful ganking machines on the Rift, which is why a lot of low elo summoners are screaming OP about him due to the importance of the early game in those elos. Though he may die going in after someone, he's good at ensuring that his target doesn't do much during the course of a team fight, and if it's the enemy AD carry versus a tank, that's always a good trade for you. Now that you understand the basics, let's look at his abilities. After 5 nearby spell casts, regardless of which team casts them, Maokai's passive, Sap Magic, heals him for a percentage of his maximum health on his next auto attack. You can see when this is active by looking at the tooltip above the abilities bar, or by looking for a glow on his left arm. This makes Maokai one of the only tanks in the game that actually has a tank passive. While in teamfights, it gives him a large amount of hidden survivability, as spells are always being thrown out around him. This also gives him synergy with anyone who can spam abilities quickly, as well as effective against anyone who does the same. The passive also has a surprisingly long range for where an ability needs to be in order to actually trigger the effect, allowing you to just be sitting at rates while your mid lane is near his turret, and gain secondary benefits from them using abilities to wave clear. Be aware though, that this passive does not trigger on buildings. You will need to hit a minion, monster, champion, or ward in order to trigger this. So basically everything but the turrets, inhibitors, and the nexus itself. His Q is Arcane Smash, his main tool to push lanes and clear the jungle. Upon casting, Maokai throws out arcane energy for a short distance in the direction of your cursor. All enemies within the area take magic damage and are slowed for a short time after. Enemies directly next to Maokai are hit by both effects and receive a slight knockback away from him. This knockback is crucial to your toolkit, as it allows you to interrupt channeled abilities such as Fiddlestick's Drain or Katarina's ultimate. Due to its low cooldown, it is the main device for how Maokai is able to stick to targets. As though the range on it might not seem very meaningful, he can reach farther than it might look. It also gives him a bit of extra safety, allowing him a cheap tool that can knock away your slow enemies chasing him, be it an early game jungle invade, or kiting back during a late game team fight. His W is Twisted Advance, his Time to Die spell. Upon targeting an enemy, Maokai transforms into a bundle of vines and moves quickly towards that enemy. Upon reaching them, the target enemy is snared and takes magic damage equal to a percentage of his maximum health. While Maokai is moving to the target, he becomes untargetable, allowing him to effectively dodge skill shots. However, if a projectile, such as an auto attack, has already targeted you, it will still deal its damage once it reaches you, even if you are still technically untargetable. Its hidden damage makes it really good to finish off an enemy as well as scaring the living crap out of them. By immediately damaging your enemies as soon as you land on them, it identifies you as a legitimate threat that has to be answered to. Otherwise, they could lose plenty more health. Just don't use this if you're already tanking the tower for an ally, as becoming untargetable resets tower aggro away from you. The trick with this ability is just getting up to land it, as it's his only way to close the gap outside of your movement speed slows. Taking advantage of unwarded bushes will help to ensure that you are better able to surprise the enemy with your hidden power. Be aware though, that when the enemy flashes or uses an escape spell, you will follow them along for the ride, regardless of whether they remain in vision or not. In some scenarios, this could be a good thing to get closer to the back line, but it can also cause you to overextend, majorly. Try to keep tabs on when the enemy's escape spell is up, especially in the early game, and when your flash is available in order to try and prevent this from happening. Unless you're so far ahead that it doesn't even matter, in which case, let him have it. His E is Sapling Toss, where you get to introduce the enemy to your little friends. These cute guys are AoE skill shots that deal magic damage on whomever they hit on the way down. They will remain there for 35 seconds or until an enemy comes too close, in which case they will run with glee towards them and then blow up in their face, dealing more magic damage and slowing those hit by the blast. Between this and your wards, you can keep a decent amount of the map in vision. Early game, stacking them up on a jungle monster about to spawn will make for a faster clear, and mean your allies won't have to leash as hard. Just tell them not to use AoE abilities on their leash, or you might not hit level 2 with the camp. It's also good for throwing behind you in order to kite enemies off, without having to risk getting close to utilize the slow on Arcane Smash. It's hard to take advantage of the slowing effects on these guys while on the attack though, simply because there's the delay while throwing them, and then the delay as they run over to make a new friend. They don't do too much damage in the long run, but they do give you some minor poke, long range utility, and clearing speed. Using this too often can be a mana drain for not much of a benefit though, so if you are a little low on mana, strongly consider whether you value utilizing your saplings now, or saving that mana for a team fight later. His ultimate is Vengeful Maelstrom, his other Time to Die spell. Upon activation, Maokai surrounds himself in energy. While active, damage dealt to any ally within the radius, including yourself, will be reduced by a percentage. This will consistently drain mana as it is left up, and will deactivate either when you run out of mana or press your ult key again. Whenever it does deactivate, it will explode around you, dealing magic damage to all enemies within radius. This damage is increased depending on how much damage the ultimate mitigated while it was up, until it reaches a cap. However, turrets are not affected by the damage reduction, so throwing it out to try and stop the nasty turret aggro is pointless. Essentially what we've learned here today is that towers don't like trees, and you don't like them either, so knock them down. Since you can move around with this spell, even if your enemy thinks they're safe, you just bring the pain back with you all day long. It's a good finisher to a team fight, but when in doubt, leave it active for the damage reduction rather than blowing it up to try and finish an enemy. The only exceptions to this are if you know the enemy can be killed with it, or that someone will be able to kill them if you do detonate it, or if you need to conserve your mana. If you're doing your job right, it won't be hard to meet the damage mitigation limit, so don't be afraid to keep it active once it does reach the cap. Now let's talk about the upgrade path. Start with Sapling Toss at level 1 to provide some early game vision and to help with your first jungle buff. Grab Arcane Smash next to improve your wave clear, and then Twisted Advance to allow you to gank. From there, I prefer to max Arcane Smash. Doing this gives you better jungle clear so that you can spend more time ganking other lanes and deal more damage all the way. Max Twisted Advance second in order to decrease the cooldown and to make better use of the damage tucked away within it. Max Sapling Toss last, as the only benefit you gain from maxing it is potentially higher damage for a higher mana cost. As with most champions, upgrade your ultimate whenever it is available. With abilities out of the way, let's look at our build, starting with our rune page. For marks, attack speed is your best bet to help you with clear time. Some of you might be wondering why I'm not running magic penetration, as Maokai's abilities are on a decently low cooldown and could work well with it. Magic Pen definitely would give him more damage on his abilities, and that is a compelling argument to take them. I did used to run them back before I got my new rune page and was able to put attack speed on it. The difference is in the clear time. Magic Penetration helps your abilities, but you usually have enough AoE damage to take down the smaller monsters anyway. Attack speed helps you do extra damage to the large monster, which is usually the problematic one. And while you might lose some magic damage in a gank, it will be made up for by the fact that you'll be ganking overall more. Even back in Season 2, when AoE junglers were much more popular, the shift from Magic Pen to attack speed in terms of clear time was drastic. On top of that, attack speed marks allow you to do more damage to turrets. And since that you're really good at pushing already, being able to fit in extra auto attacks to take down turrets is always a good thing. For seals, the usual staple of armor goes a long way. Who doesn't use armor seals? Well, I don't use them on my Nami, but that's a rare exception that I've already talked in detail about. They give you increased durability against turrets, jungle monsters, minions, AD carries, auto attacks in general, and are overall good for helping you to not take too much damage on the first few jungle clears. They don't scale well into the late game, but even by the mid game with only your jungle item, you'll be sitting on a decent amount of armor. For glyphs, scaling magic resistance is the best choice. The only time you would want flat magic resistance is if you're going to gank a lane with a lot of magic damage in it, such as the mid lane or against some supports. Jungle monsters don't deal magic damage, and most junglers who would want to invade you focus more on physical damage anyway. Most enemy magic damage threats are at their scariest in the later parts of the game, so having scaling magic resistance allows you more room to breathe when trying to peel them off of your carry. For quintessences, I prefer movement speed. Maokai has a good amount of damage, crowd control, and durability to be an all-around powerful champion, so all he needs is to get up to the enemy's face and punch it. To help him do that, he wants movement speed. This will help you in ganks, chases, initiation, and positioning yourself to help your saplings make new friends. For Masteries, I use a 0-21-9 set, putting focus into extra durability and damage reduction from jungle monsters and defense, and going for extra mana regen and movement speed on utility. Wherever possible, you want to try and shake the effects of crowd control off of you, so going all the way into the defensive tree is definitely encouraged. Extra health and health regen is always appreciated, as it will synergize with one of the items that we'll be building. Since that you're going to be slowing a lot of enemy champions, the defense point that reduces damage from CC'd enemies will also come in handy to make them even less useful. Decreased damage from jungle monsters will help your early clears be less painful, and as for the utility tree, the extra movement speed is always appreciated as a jungler, the mana regen will help early on, and the extra buff duration will help you make the most of the buffs when you get them. Your summoner spells will be Flash and Smite. Flash is a nice go-to for any champion as it allows you a decent way to escape and to get in closer for a Twisted Advance. I have won games purely off of flashing and then using Twisted Advance on a carry to begin the murder fest. Since that you don't have an inherent escape spell, besides some trickery with Twisted Advance here and there, it's also nice to have if you need to get out of the way of the enemy right this instant. Smite is something that all junglers can and should take, as it improves your clear time, helps secure Dragon and Baron, or to steal them from the enemy jungler. Your starting items will be typical for a jungler, with Hunter's Machete, 4 health potions, and the Warding Trinket. On your first recall, you will pick up Quill Coat to help you with clear time and for the extra ward, as well as tier 1 boots for some extra mobility. Along with that, replace your Warding Trinket for the Sweeper Trinket in order to help deal with enemy wards. One doesn't realize how many wards one walks over until he sees his replays, and failing to heed my own advice has cost me more times than I'm comfortable with. However, before I move on, let me make one thing clear. Because you have Quill Coat or its upgrade Spirit of the Ancient Golem, along with Sapling Toss, that does not mean that you are allowed to stop buying normal wards. "But I've already got a ward right here," you might be saying. "Cry me a river and put a ward in it." This might be Season 4, where everyone has a trinket, but that doesn't mean that vision is any less important, or that you shouldn't forget to buy pink wards, or that your allies won't forget to use their wards at times. Your sapling toss is useful for ensuring that the enemy isn't hiding in a nearby bush, but there are two problems with using sapling toss in such a manner. First, it drains your mana, which you'll end up burning through trying to keep Vengeful Maelstrom up and sticking to your target in a team fight. If you're at half mana, it might not be a good idea to throw out your little friend until after you've allowed your mana regen to do some work. Second, unless you pay diligent attention to the minimap, saplings are only good for telling you where the enemy isn't, as the moment a friend comes by, the sapling is going on a trip to join them. Considering that I, as a support and jungle main, only take quick glances at my minimap, despite playing a lot of Maokai back in the day, I have trouble thinking you are going to keep your eyes glued to the minimap and then notice the exact moment a friend pops up to say hello to the sapling. Wards are more consistent, don't die when enemies walk into the bushes that they reside in, unless they have a sweep or a pink, and last much longer. There is almost never a time when you wouldn't want a little bit of extra vision, so do yourself a favor. Get in the habit of picking up one ward every time you recall. It can be a normal ward or a pink ward, doesn't matter. Just grab the damn ward and put it on the damn map. Especially considering you're trying to initiate team fights, you will want to know as much as you can about the enemy position, so just do it. Moving on from there, your next choice of items will be to finish up your tier 2 boots and Spirit of the Ancient Golem. The order in which you do this will depend primarily on which tier 2 boots you're getting, and what you're planning to do with the rest of the laning phase. With that in mind, I personally consider two options, Mercury Shreds and Boots of Mobility. Mercury Shreds are overall useful boots for combat, tenacity to help you stay up next to your enemy, consistent movement speed, and some extra magic resistance to boot. Seems like a no-brainer, right? Well, that's what I thought, until I both got my butt kicked by another Maokai running mobility, and then tried it myself a game or two later. I stayed away from them initially because after you take or deal damage you're dropped back to tier 1 mobility, which I felt was too punishing to consider them. Though it might make sense to go something else on a jungler like Amumu who doesn't have as many ways of sticking to a target, and has a longer range initiation, Maokai doesn't struggle in that department. If you can get up to them, you won't leave their side. Mobility boots might not give you a whole lot of statistical prowess, but the sheer roaming power that they grant you more than makes up for it. For a champion known to be all over the map yanking all your lanes up, forcing you to hide your carry, hide your mid laner, mobility boots make that champion a reality. This can get pretty shut down by a poke composition, but in all likelihood, poke comps usually have enough disengage to where you wouldn't have caught them out anyway. If you are for some reason buying Mercury Shreds, then grab Spirit of the Ancient Golem first, as your priority won't be on ganking 24/7. If you're going Boots of Mobility, grab those first and then get Spirit of the Ancient Golem. As for your boot enchantment, your two options are Home Guard and Captain. In most cases, regardless of which boots you're getting, Home Guard just gives you more room to breathe and get more ganks off, to the point where I will forego starting on a core item just so I can get Home Guard. Captain does allow you better mobility in sieges, but I definitely don't recommend getting it immediately, and it'll be harder to justify it given the gold you have to dump just to grab it. Spirit Visage will be your next core item in order to deal with enemy magic damage. Your magic resistance will be significantly lower than your armor by the time you finish Spirit of the Ancient Golem, and depending on when you have to start dealing with magic damage, it could be a good idea to grab Negatron Cloak before you finish your spirit item. From here, what you build next will be dependent on your boots. If you are running Boots of Mobility, follow this item path. Grab a Glacial Shroud after Spirit Visage in order to get some more armor, cooldown reduction, and some mana to allow you to spam abilities more. Follow it up with a Chain Vest and build that into Randuin's Omen. Then, take your Glacial Shroud and upgrade that into Iceborne Gauntlet to give you some more offensive power. The slows will help you stick to your target while you have tier 1 mobility, and both will synergize with the Mastery point that reduces damage from enemies affected by crowd control. If you are going with Mercury Shreds, you will continue with the same path of Glacial Shroud and Chain Vest, but what you end up building with them will differ. The Chain Vest will be going into a Sunfire Cape, which will give you more pushing power and make you more threatening while next to enemies. The reason we're buying it here instead of on the mobility track is because the damage dealt by this while running next to minion waves will force you to tier 1 mobility, which isn't a good idea when you're trying to start up a fight. The Glacial Shroud will upgrade into Frozen Heart, and when this is finished, will grant you 40% cooldown reduction. This does make Randuin's Omen redundant though, but Sunfire Cape and Spirit Visage should give you enough health to make use of both Spirit of the Ancient Golem and your passive. With those items done, we need something to top off our build with. Most of the time you will want to consider something with magic resistance on it, as Spirit Visage will be your only magic resistance item otherwise. Your first option is, if your support isn't taking it, to run Locket of the Iron Solari. Your ultimate does a good job at mitigating AoE damage, and Locket adds further insult to injury to make the enemy's AoE comp completely worthless. Your second option is an Abyssal Scepter. Yes, I am suggesting that you put ability power on him. No, I didn't stutter. If it gets to this late in the game, you'll want a little more help to ensure that you remain a threat that has to be answered to, and the Magic Pen Aura and ability power in this item does that fairly well. Other ability power items that offer defensive stats don't synergize well with you, as Riley's Crystal Scepter's slows are redundant, and the Zhonya's invulnerability only gives your allies an opportunity to run away from your ult. Now let's talk about your actions within the game itself, beyond just abilities. There's a bit of leeway for where you want to start out in the jungle, given your use of the saplings. If you're purple team, then you will always start at the blue buff. However, if you're blue team, there's a bit more flexibility. You can go red buff for some help from your bottom lane, or you can go to the blue buff to ensure that you have enough mana to sustain yourself. In most cases, I would say start with the red buff. Regardless of where you go, your first task will be to throw a sapling out into a nearby bush to guard for you at about the 45-second mark. At the minute 20 mark, start throwing saplings onto where the buffs will spawn. Keep throwing them out as they come, as your fourth sapling should come up soon enough to make use of its damage on the way down. If you're starting blue, move to the Wraith camp, clear it out, and then do the red buff. Place your trinket in the bush to guard against a counter jungle, and start looking at the lanes to see how they're doing. If you start red, move immediately to blue, otherwise you will struggle with mana. You shouldn't need to use your smite for the blue buff, given the timing on its cooldown, so save it for the next camp you'll visit, the Wolf camp. Don't forget to use your trinket to guard the bush as well, as the bush is close enough to where a sapling will want to make a new friend. After clearing both buffs and another camp, you will have level 3 and the ganking begins. There are two important things to note when looking for a gank: the health of each champion and the position of every champion. Looking at the relative positions of other champions on both the minimap and by looking at the champion icons on the left side of your screen should give you a basic indicator of how a lane is playing out. If you see your allies either with half health or pushing their turret, it might be a good time to go help them out. However, this is where the second thing to keep in mind comes into play: the enemy jungler. Most junglers start with their buff next to the bottom lane, clear a camp, and then the next buff. That means that, in most cases, the top lane is the first source of action, which often leads to a 2v2 fight of it. After that, though, it can be harder to predict, so look at the minimap not only to check the position of laners, but also when the enemy jungler pokes out his head. If he's at the top lane and you're close to a different lane, you now have a guaranteed fight in your favor if you can catch someone out, or you could possibly take Dragon. If one of your lanes is doing well, especially if it's the mid lane, it's very likely that the enemy jungler is lingering nearby, so use your saplings, trinket, and Quillcoat ward in the side brush to help bait out and win a 2v2 there. How effective your ganks will be depends on a number of factors: how well the enemy is warding, the enemy's movement in lane, and how effective your allies are at baiting a fight. To deal with warding, ensure that you get the sweeper trinket on time in order to clear them out. Unfortunately, the rest is kind of up to your enemy's movements, which means your success will vary on a game-by-game and elo-by-elo basis. More so than with other positions, no game is ever going to play out the same, and the learning curve for getting it right is really steep and hard to adapt to. It's even harder to determine whether things went badly because you didn't act faster or whether your lanes just weren't good enough to hold their own. In fact, it wasn't until looking over my replays that I realized some of the mistakes I'm making, so take my roaming and movement across the map with a grain of salt. When you move in for a gank, lead with sapling toss if you don't have or can afford to lose your mobility boots extra speed. Twist and advance the nearest champion to lock them in place, and then move in between them and their tower. Once you've done that, auto-attack them once and then use Arcane Smash to knock them closer to your allies, and then continue to beat on them. If you are able to land Twisted Advance, it will hurt them a fair amount, and at the very least you will cause them to burn Flash. Just be aware of how close the enemy is to their turret, as this is the most dangerous time to get flashed into tower range. If you either kill one or both laners, or force them back to their base, push the wave into the turret, both to deny CS and experience to the enemy laner, and to do some minor damage to the turret. If the enemy jungler is also not nearby and there isn't a lane that needs your help, you might also want to land some auto attacks on the turret in order to help get that objective. You may also choose to tax your lane. In other words, take a couple minions from their lane as a sort of payment for helping them out. In order to avoid petty arguments over CS, follow these basic rules. If you get the kill, take only one and not the cannon minion. If you get the assist, it's okay to take more, but don't take more than 3, and if possible, make sure that they're the caster minions, which don't grant as much gold per kill. After everything is said and done, you're trying to help every lane win, and taking too many minions could give them reason to complain at you. In other scenarios, your laner may die to a gank from the enemy jungler, or just end up in a bad situation and die. If you are nearby, the best thing you can do in this instance is to go into that lane. The purpose for this is twofold. It helps prevent any golden experience from being lost, and could prevent the enemy from recalling. If you can delay the exit of the enemy laner, that is really good, as it creates an awkward scenario for them. If they decide to try and deal with you, your laner will come back with an item lead, which will even out the experience lead that they may have built up. Recalling means they are guaranteed to lose some golden experience when you shove the minion wave into their turret. As for general movement around the map, much of that will, again, be based off of experience and elo rank. In lower elo, you can generally get more ganks off, as enemies are more likely to overextend or fail to ward. In higher elo, the late game is an important thing to keep in mind, which might mean spending more time helping your hyper carry rather than another lane. As a general rule of thumb, this is the order of your priorities. First, you focus on helping out lanes that are struggling. Then, you focus on lanes that will help you win in the long run. Then you focus on defending or taking objectives. Then you worry about your own farm. If you do your job right with your ganks, you'll have enough gold for all of your items. Don't sweat your own farm too much. Even if you don't get a single kill and all you do is zone the enemy, that can still be a win, as your allies will be more likely to emerge as more powerful than their adversaries. When it comes to the mid and late game, your job is to be anywhere and everywhere that needs help. In other words, it's a lot like the early game, only you're more focused on objectives, and your farming time is cut even shorter with everyone else wanting your CS. You would think they would know that you have Spirit of the Ancient Golem and can better take advantage of those monsters, but I digress. When an engagement comes up, you have two choices, and which one you take will vary based on the teamfight itself and the team composition of both sides. Your first choice is to play the initiator and be the first into the fight. Your second choice is to bide for time and play defensively, waiting for your enemy to get overconfident and think they can get past your wall of slows. Let's talk about initiation first. There are two major bits of advice I can give to anyone regarding initiation. First, never try to force a team fight. If you try hard enough, you will get your team fight. It doesn't mean you'll get a good one that you can actually win, but you will get it. You have enough offensive and defensive power to both initiate and react to an initiation. Patience is a virtue, and good things come to those who wait for the carry to get out of position, rather than trying to 1v5 for the carry. I can understand wanting to try to conclude a game before an enemy's late game gets out of hand, but even then, wait for your opportunity to strike. You are better off letting them get farm, rather than accidentally handing them the bad team fight that convincingly puts them back in the game. Along with making sure the enemy are as unprepared as possible, try to make sure that your allies will be ready to dive in as soon as you catch someone out. Diving in by yourself isn't going to accomplish anything, as you personally don't have the damage to actually kill someone on your own. Second, don't engage on the tank. This should go without saying, but in the heat of the moment when you think you're invincible, it's very easy to let yourself get overconfident and think you can take down their front line, and then deal with the actual damage. I've thrown promotion series by doing that crap. Never initiate on the tank unless the damage dealers are already dead or cannot get there in time. And when in doubt, they can get there in time and you shouldn't do it. When it comes to being defensive, this is usually easier to do, and much simpler as it doesn't require you to get up close to an enemy carry. As soon as you see an enemy dive for your carry, Twisted advance right on top of him and become a living oak shield. Use your ultimate to mitigate as much damage as possible if you're close enough to the carries, but even if all you do is protect yourself as they try to get past you, that's also good. If you pace out your slows properly, you can keep them perma-slowed, fitting in Iceborne Gauntlet in between your Arcane Smash and Sampling Toss, and waiting on Randuin Zoman slow after all of that has been burned. You might not be able to lock them up completely, but it should give your carry enough room to maneuver to where they can return fire. To determine which one is more important, think about who the champions are on each team and which ones are the most powerful. This can be due simply to the champions themselves, or related to where the gold is most concentrated. If you have a hypercarry like Kog'Maw or Vayne, it's much more of a priority to keep them alive, but if the enemy has the hypercarry, that jerk must die immediately or you will never see their nexus destroyed. If there's another person on your team that is able to be the first one in for the assassin, or who can dive on their own, then that leaves you more room to play defensively and react to when the enemy tries to counter-engage. Regardless of what you do, don't be afraid to die, and don't forget to auto-attack for some extra health. After you win a team fight, it's what you do after it that makes the difference. Taking down a couple of enemy champions and then recalling isn't going to be as impactful as sieging an enemy turret or forcing a 3v5 in your favor after those 2 kills have happened, or just taking Dragon. The best objective to go for is the safest objective that causes the most damage to the enemy team with the largest gain for you. Taking down a turret will almost always be preferential to taking the Dragon, or even the Baron in some cases. Don't see killing enemies as a way to gain gold. See them as an obstruction to the destruction of the enemy nexus. Everything you do in this game is a means to an end, focused on destroying that final structure. Bear that in mind at all times, and if that means dying to ensure that your team can finish out strong, then once more into the breach. As a parting note, bear in mind that with Maokai's current toolkit, it is very easy to kill steal with him. Under no circumstances are you to feel ashamed for doing so. This is a team game, and though I may use the term for convenience, kill stealing does not exist. It might be better to have kills go on your carries and assassins, and if it happens too often it definitely can be problematic. But if you haven't taken at least 1 kill in a game by accident, then the enemy aren't dying enough. That goes for anyone regardless of role in the laning phase or team fight phase. That doesn't mean that you should go out of your way to take kills, but it does mean when, not if, when it happens, you shouldn't be ashamed of it. Well, I never thought I would beat the length on my Nami guide, but apparently all I needed to do was talk about a jungler. To those of you still here, thanks for taking the time to listen to my rambling. Please consider liking and sharing this video if you find it deserving, and keep an eye on this channel for some more long-ass guides and other content posted on a not-so-regular basis. Let me know what you think in the comments below, telling me all I inevitably forgot to mention. Good luck if you decide to pick up Maokai, and whatever you may do, I wish you the best of luck on the fields of justice.